So I have two choices. One, I can actually see it as a poison, as something that's going to ravage my body, or I could reframe it and see it as an elixir, as a healing ointment, as something that's given to me in order to regenerate or to heal. Up until that point in my life, I was a very independent person. And then you're wrestled with the fact that you have all these caretakers who are trying to help you and heal you. And so I was like, well, there's two options. I can either fight it, or I can either meet them where they are. I've interviewed 200 cancer survivors, and he came to me and he was like, on the back end, this needs to be a book, my friend. And I'm like, okay. And so we launched a book. It became a bestseller in 4 categories on my birthday. I firmly believe, and it's a thread line throughout my whole TEDx talk and what I do, which is this idea to know thyself is to heal thyself. And it's always an inside job. Like the doctors and the tests are what they are, and they do what they do perfectly and well.
Welcome to Inspired by Success, the podcast where I deep dive into the mindset of successful entrepreneurs, CEOs, and thought leaders. Get ready to be inspired and gain valuable insights to unlock your true potential. Imagine facing a life-altering challenge and emerging stronger, more determined, and driven to help others do the same. Our guest today has done just that. Diagnosed with stage 3 cancer in 2014, he's been in remission for 9 years, turning his battle into a mission to empower cancer survivors and leaders. As the founder of the Human Resolve, a coaching platform, he helps people amplify their voices and discover their true potential. He's also a TEDx speaker with a powerful talk titled 7 Minutes to Wellness, How to Love Your Inner Stranger, a best-selling author and a media journalist featured on Fox News, The Wrap, and more. He's interviewed celebrities like Venus Williams and Deborah Messing and shared his expertise through notable publications. Let's welcome the inspiring Savio P. Clemente. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for the intro. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Tell us your story. Can you share your cancer diagnosis and how that changed your life perspective?
Absolutely. So the cancer thing is the most important thing that people like to know about. And I have actually separated myself from the trauma of it, so I can speak very candidly about it. So cancer showed up in my life in July of 2014. I was with a friend and we were in Paris, London, and Amsterdam on a trip. And I kept noticing at night these drenching night sweats. And I was like, this is very odd. So I just chalked it up to the environment. Came home to the States and I had them. And then all of a sudden, a week later, I started getting distended stomach. It started getting bigger and bigger. And then I started having some breathing issues. So at that point in my life, I, quote unquote, was living a very physically fit life. I was working out 6 days a week, boxing, strength training, spinning classes. I was eating organic food, hormone free. I was meditating. I was a long time meditator. So I did all the quote unquote right stress relieving things in my life. But I was actually going through a business venture with 3 other people and it wasn't going so well. So mentally and emotionally, things were off skew. And so my naturopath at that point, I saw him for about 8 years. He would analyze my blood work, analyze my vitamin structure, analyze what foods I eat. And he's like, Savio, something's wrong here, my friend. He's like, I need you to get a sonogram. And I'm like, a sonogram? He's like, yes. So I ended up getting a sonogram. They wouldn't let me leave the office for an hour and a half. Finally came out and they actually said to me that a relative needed to come pick me up. And I'm like, wait a minute, I drove here by myself. And they're like, nope, you need to have a relative pick you up. You need to go to the hospital. I'm like, what? So I go to the hospital. Within an hour, they admitted me to the 5th floor. And then later that night, I heard nurses speaking that they were going to transfer me to the 7th floor, which they call the cancer floor. So I knew at that time in my life, or at that moment, that something with cancer was in my life. I didn't know what that was until the next day when they wheeled me into getting a nephrostomy tube because of the distension in my stomach. They had to put something in order to relieve some of that extra fluid from my stomach. It's called ascites. And that's when the doctor whispered in my ear that it was DLBCL, stage 3, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. But he did say that if there's a cancer to get, this is the cancer to get, which was a very odd thing to tell someone, but that's what he said. Because he said that we have therapeutics and biologics that are going to help you overcome this. So that's what happened. And then I was bedridden for 1 week because of the nephrostomy tube. And then I was in the hospital for an additional 6 days. And 3 days before the 6 days, the medical director came to me. She's like, listen, we know your whole health history. We know you're someone who doesn't even take aspirin. But I'm telling you right now, you need to start your first round of chemo. And I'm like, it's that bad? And she's like, it's that bad. So I ended up getting my first round of chemo. We could talk about how I made the decision in order to discover for myself what true healing was. But that was the onset of me finding out.
Wait, so you lived a healthy lifestyle prior to that? You ate healthy food. Is it genetic? How did that happen? Is it because the stress from the business? Do you think that was what caused it?
See, I think when it comes to cancer now, at this point in my life as a journalist, I've interviewed 200 cancer survivors, different forms of cancer, different types, different ethnicities, different races. I don't know if we'll ever find out truly with certain cancers what the cause of the effect is. I don't know. And that's something for if you're someone who's religious or spiritual, that's people like that can answer that. I don't know.
Mm.
What I did know and what the doctors did say is that for lymphoma, which is what I had, a blood cancer, that they often don't find causes of the effects. They did do a whole background history and ancestral history. No one in both my dad and my mom's family has ever had a blood cancer of any kind. So there was no origin story with that. But
Mm.
I also did feel, Linda, to a large degree, what is that really going to do for me, right? It's not going to do anything for me at the moment, right? It's great to know that and maybe to be more cautious of that. But with blood cancers, as long as with some other types of cancers, you just don't know. So I just decided for myself that I was going to confront it and face it and actually accept it and actually try to find ways and means to overcome it.
And how did you find that strength too, especially going through chemotherapy? I heard it's a really painful process as well. So, what are the thoughts that were going through your head at the time? And was there anything that gave you hope? Tell me about that.
So I actually spoke to a really good friend of mine, probably one of the wisest people I've ever known. And I told her the medical doctor said to me that I need to start my first round of chemo. And she's like, Savio, are you sure you want to go through that? Because chemo ravages the body. It just does it, the good and the bad. It just destroys whatever it sees. And I really had to think very, very deeply. And it's so interesting because, they say that when certain things happen in your life, you reach a different pinnacle or level. And somehow this massive insight came into my brain. And it was this movie that I saw, and I tell this story all the time because it was so pivotal. It was this movie starring Keanu Reeves, the actor, and he played Siddhartha, which is a little Buddha, and the movie was called Little Buddha. And in it, he plays the Buddha who gave up all his worldly possessions. So he lived a very lifestyle of leisure and lavish. He gave it all up, and he was meditating with two other ascetics. They were living on, I think, 1 grain of rice per day or maybe per week. And while meditating, he overheard two individuals on a fishing boat, one older, one younger. And the older person said to the younger person who had an instrument in his hand, he goes, if you hold the string too tight, it will snap. And if you leave it too slack, it won't play. The path is the middle way. And it was like a flash of insight hit my head. I'm like, oh, so I can say yes to this chemo, which is the medical doctor is telling me to do, but yet I can do other things once I get out of this hospital. And that's what I chose to do. So I did a panoply of different integrative modalities, various things from energy medicine to ozone therapy, because I truly believed in body autonomy. And so I did 6 rounds of chemo. So the first round was in the hospital, 5 additional rounds every 3 weeks. It was something called RCHOP. And in between those 3 weeks, I did all those things. I read the Quran. I studied all different belief systems and what they believed healing was, because I tell people all the time, I'm a board certified wellness coach, that healing doesn't always happen in the medical office. It doesn't always happen in the chemo bed. It happens in ways and means that we just don't understand or know. It's a mystery for each person to try to find that healing. And for me, I made healing my mission. I gave up everything else in my life. Fortunately, I had the ability to do that. And I just wanted to focus on myself. So chemo was rough. It's about 5 to 6 hours. My dad wanted to come with me to get my chemo infusions. And I go, Dad, you staring at me it's not going to make for 5, 6 hours is not going to make me heal any quicker or any better. So he would pick me up after the infusions. But there's a story that I also relay in my TEDx talk, which is seeing the first time I ever saw one of the treatment drugs. So it was like 4 drugs. And it had a beautiful name called vincristine, but it was this red gelatinous jelly thing. And I looked at the nurse and I'm like, wait, that's going in me? And she's like, yeah. And I'm like, I just really, honestly, I just said to myself, this is where life has taken me. So I have two choices. One, I can actually see it as a poison, as something that's going to ravage my body, or I could reframe it and see it as an elixir, as a healing ointment, as something that's given to me. In the Bible, they call it manna, something that's given for me in order to regenerate or to heal. And so that's what I chose to do. Every session, every infusion, that's what I chose to do.
Wow, it's the power of the mind as well. Curious to know about this ozone therapy. What's that?
Ozone therapy. So it's been used in Germany for a really long time. I actually had a friend who had tinnitus, and he was doing ozone right before I had cancer, and he was telling me the benefits of it. And so when I had cancer, I saw the doctor, and he's like, "Yeah, absolutely." So basically, they put an additional O3 gas. So there's three ways you can administer ozone. So one, which is what I had, which is they take a saline drip, they put O3 gas in it, 2 to 3 passes of that, and they give it to you as an IV. There's another way that they could do it, which is they take the blood in your body, they put it in the centrifuge, they add O3 gas in it, and then they re-inject it into your system. And the third option is through anally. So I chose the saline option. I didn't want the blood option because it just was too risky, given that I had a blood cancer. And the third option just seemed uncomfortable, and I don't know how beneficial it would be for my particular situation. Fortunately, these are vetted doctors, so they know what they're doing. They're just in the realm of alternative or holistic. Fortunately,
Mm.
now 10 years later, I see a lot of them cropping up. But for me to find this was, I had to search around, actually.
It sounds like quite a healing path, and you're still doing it. I love it. What does loving your inner stranger mean for personal growth? Because you've had a lot of discoveries, you're on a journey of healing and self-healing, but let's talk about loving your stranger. What does that mean for person?
Yeah, most people when they hear the word stranger, they're like so confused. They're like, "You mean the inner critic that pounds?" I'm like, "No, no, that's not what I mean." They're like, "You mean the inner child?" I'm like, "No, no, that's not what I mean." I'm like, "The inner stranger is whatever it means to you." I mean, to be honest, Alinda, for me, the inner stranger, that whole idea came from my cancer diagnosis because I saw my physical body, the Savio, dying of stage 3 in the hospital bed, bedridden. But this other parts of me that were so alive, like my emotional center, my relationships with other people, my mental faculties were still there. I created a Google alert. My dreams were very vivid. I cared and had empathy for other people because I had at this point 4 other roommates in and out of the room, and 2 of them had brain cancer. So I was like still alive, and I was like, how do I pull the stranger that's dying? And the stranger for me, if you were asking, it was shame. I felt a lot of shame around my cancer. I felt like I invited it in. I don't know what the origin story is, but I also felt vulnerability for that as well, because up until that point in my life, I was a very independent person. And then you're wrestled with the fact that you have all these caretakers who are trying to help you and heal you. And so I was like, well, there's 2 options. I can either fight it, or I can either meet them where they are, meet the energy for where it is. And so I chose to do that. So I tell people all the time, other people describe the inner stranger as something that they aspire to be and do, but they just can't seem to get there. Another person described it, who's a very Buddhist individual, as that inner stranger is a past life of theirs that they can't shake off, that they can't overcome, that they can't work through the karma on. So I consciously wanted to make it nebulous on purpose, because to others, the inner stranger is this idea that we're living a very human physical existence, but yet a divine purpose, a soul calling, and that's their inner stranger. So I left it to interpretation.
Wow. What's your divine calling? Because you like to empower and help others. What's yours?
Yeah, so for me, I made a decision after 5 years in remission. It's never a guarantee, but oncologists will tell you that most of the time they say remission or no evidence of disease. Rarely will they ever say that you're cured, but after 5 years, it's less likely to occur. It could still occur. There's a lot of people that I have lost, a lot of people that the cancers have reoccurred, and unfortunately, that is the truth, and you have to live with that particular one. But for me, after 5 years, I decided I wanted to do something with it. So I became a board certified wellness coach. I passed my boards. It's the same test that, the same board that gives, it's called the MBNE, which the National Board of Medical Examiners, it's what gives MDs their MD status in the States. And so it was a test administered by them. So I made sure that if I was going to help someone coaching wise, I understood where they're coming from, and I was expertise and had the training in order to understand that. I also then went on a little ride and I got an ICF certification. It means nothing for the layman, but it's the gold standard in coaching as well, because I wanted to make sure that I knew what I was doing. And then I pitched an idea I was a writer. I pitched an idea to my editor and I said, can we do something about cancer survivors in my community? And he's like, yeah, let's do it. So he thought of a great title. It's called I Survived Cancer. Here's How I Did It. And at this point in my life, like I mentioned earlier, I've interviewed 200 cancer survivors. And he came to me and he was like, on the back end, this needs to be a book, my friend. And I'm like, okay. And so we launched a book. It became a bestseller in 4 categories on my birthday. And to me, the story of hope, it just resonates because it's not about the status of the book. It's about the reach of the book. What is it doing for people? What is it allowing people to see? And one of the pivotal questions I ask in the book with these cancer survivors is, if cancer had a message for you, what would that message be? And they're like, what kind of question is this? Because they're like, I just want to get it away from me. It's the big bad wolf. It's something that's scary and awful and evil. But I never saw it as a possible teacher or something that's going to open up a door that I never wanted to cross or I never think that I could cross. And I made that consciously challenging for people because I wanted people to go within, because I firmly believe, and it's a thread line throughout my whole TEDx talk and what I do, which is this idea to know thyself is to heal thyself. And it's always an inside job. Like the doctors and the tests are what they are, and they do what they do perfectly and well. But this other part of yourself, this emotional, this mental, this relational, your dreams, your spirituality, they're all something that you need to work to and work through and work against and work over, because you're the only one who can do it.
That was something that we spoke about before this episode. Know thyself, heal thyself. So I was fascinated by that one sentence. So can you elaborate a little bit about that? And how does one get to know themselves a bit more and become more self-aware as well? And do you have any recommendations? Is it about meditation? Any tips and advice to how we can know? Can you explain a little bit about that and how can we become to know thyself, as you mentioned, in order to heal?
Most of my clients are individuals that have cancer or face some type of medical adversity. It's really a space that I feel called to speak to, because not only have I gone through it, but I also understand very well on how you telling your story, amplifying your impact can impact other people, and they themselves can be leaders in terms of other people following them and allowing them to spread their message. But I make it very simple. I created a framework in my TEDx talk. It's called the Aloha Reboot. The origin is through a healing modality called Huna healing from Hawaii. And of that, there's an offshoot called Ho'oponopono. And Ho'oponopono is really this idea of self-forgiveness and self-compassion. So my Aloha Reboot is 7 minutes. That's why I call the talk 7 Minutes to Wellness. So basically, A is the acronym. So A stands for acknowledge. Acknowledge where you are. Don't pretend. Don't try to misalign. Really acknowledge where you are. L stands for listening. So listen to that inner voice. So the work that I do is really about this idea of the 3 brains, the head, heart, and gut, that there's anecdotal evidence that shows that has some level of knowingness, of consciousness, of movement. People often assume that you make decisions by thinking, but research has shown that when people actually buy products and services, they do it with the heart, they do it with emotions. So the O in Aloha is really about opening yourself to self-compassion and self-forgiveness. H stands for harnessing, so harness that wisdom from within. And A is really about that inspired action, taking that action from what you learned and gleaned and applying it through your life. So like you mentioned earlier, it could be through meditation. It could be through prayer. It could be through breath work. A quick breath work is 4 inhales in, 5 inhales out. Or you could do it in another box breathing way where you could do 4, 4, 4, and 4, and then end it with 5. However feels most relevant or comfortable to you. People like to go on nature walks. You can do it there. But the key element there is really tapping into what's going on within yourself. Rather than always responding to external stimuli, you're actually doing the hardest work of all, which is figuring out the interior mechanisms of why you do the things you do and what's actually prompting those decision-making processes.
Wow, that's interesting. And you mentioned the breath work as well. I've just started going into that because I discovered something called a YouTube ad called quantum breath work. So I thought, oh, all right, I'll start doing that and adding that to my meditation every now and then. And it's just deep breathing a certain way, trying to get your brain waves in a certain state as well. But can you explain the benefits of breath work and why it helps? And did you use that during your recovery process as well?
So I didn't use a formalized breath work in my recovery. I use most beyond the traditional medicine avenues that I chose and the integrative modalities that I chose, I used really meditation and affirmation every day. Breathwork was something I was introduced because people often assume that once you survive cancer, that's it. There's a whole thing of emotions and feelings and sensations and traumas that you have to work through after you survive, because it's not as simple as that, because then you face issues with reoccurrence, you face issues with survivor's guilt, you face issues with scan anxiety. That's a real thing. People get afraid a week or two before their scans because they feel fine, but they don't know what a test is going to say. And so the key elements in all of that, at least for me, in discovering breath work, and there's many different types and forms, is really about being conscious of the monkey mind that's happening, the mind that's constantly going, and allowing yourself to detach from it to the point of feeling like you're in control of something that's very autonomic for us, right? It's very easy. The breath just happens. We don't really think about it. But when you focus on that, you allow yourself to become more grounded and present in what you're doing. And so I find great benefit out of it. It's not something that I would say that I do religiously, but it's something that my clients often swear by, because for the most part, they're not conscious of what's happening within their internal selves. They're very conscious about what's happening externally. And so another thing that I often tell people is you could just do just conscious breathing in terms of breathing into different body parts. So the top of the head all the way down to the feet. And it really has a level of just calmness. That's literally how I start most of my coaching sessions.
Wow. And let's talk about your coaching sessions. As a wellness coach, how do you guide clients to having more healthier lives, living more healthier lives?
So the key first year is really, with coaching, it's always about the vision. So a vision is not a goal. A vision is how you want to feel, how do you want to be, how is it you want your life to be represented. So it's always about creating that vision. And you also have to have some type of definitive destination. Otherwise, it's just a conversation. Coaching is a conversation with a purpose. And so because I live in the world of helping individuals who face some level of adversity or medical adversity and allowing them to become unstoppable leaders in their own fields and creating from that offshoots, both personally and professionally, I often say to them, let's make an inventory list of what's happening. Once we do that, let's make a list, or let's try to ferret out what are your strengths. So there's many assessments with strengths. There's the VIA assessment. Then the third thing is really to figure out for themselves in order to get to that vision, what are the steps that we need to take? And what are the ways that you found for yourself that you've stumbled from reaching those? So to a large part, one of the greatest things that I learned in my trainings was this idea of the change model. So it's called the trans-theoretical model of change. And it posits that individuals are not adverse to changing. They just don't know how to change. That's the problem. And so there's levels and stages of change, which is thinking about change, acting on change, doing the change, reverting back, and actually making it a lifestyle change. So I help my clients really to determine how that shapes and forms in their own lives, and then to gain and garner some wins. So we start every conversation with this idea of, where'd you win this week, or where'd you win in this particular aspect of what we're trying to create? And then to try to reframe this idea that a loss is not a complete loss. A loss is just a step that just didn't come to fruition in the way that we wanted to. But it's never about the big steps. It's always about the little tiny ones along the way.
Wow. So how has this journey of becoming a coach worked for you? Because a lot of the listeners are also entrepreneurs, and I just wanted to share some lessons. So do you have any lessons on what worked for you? Any lessons for aspiring entrepreneurs, basically?
Sure. A great entrepreneur, actually, that I talked to, he comes to mind right now, where we were talking, and in the conversation, I asked him a very simple question. I was like, because he mentioned that he was a latchkey kid growing up in Australia, and he would come home and he's like, he would just, watch TV until his parents came. And I'm like, what was your favorite show? And he was really taken back by it. He's like, what kind of question is this? We're talking about where I want to go with my business, right? But when it comes to coaching, whether it's executive coaching or life coaching or wellness coaching, it's always going to talk about the personal aspects of self. And so he was talking about how he would be mesmerized by the commercials. And, he was an ad exec, very high powered ad exec job. And he realized he doesn't want to do that anymore. So he had to let that childhood fantasy of being coddled, of being nurtured, of being seen with those commercials to go in order to create his entrepreneurial dreams of doing something on his own. And so that's a stark example of the fact that we choose often ways and paths and means, but it doesn't always dictate at the end of the day what the complete journey will be. I can speak for myself. If cancer didn't come into my life, Linda, I would not do any of this. I mean, my background was honestly IT and project management, and I was in think tanks, and I did a lot of that work, and it was great. And I dabbled in TV production with those groups of people that I said I had some stressful things with, but I would have never done it. And for myself to create coaching, and then I'm a journalist, and I've interviewed celebrities like Venus Williams and Carson Kressley. I've been flown to Italy and India with National Geographic in order to cover wellness experiences. And at this point, I've interviewed 2,000 thought leaders and experts from all the way from longevity to the fear of failure to overcoming discrepancies with their own lives. It's fascinating to me because I just did it with this notion of trying to serve and help and give value. But what I've gotten in return is this giant well of inspiration, and it keeps me going every single day.
Wow, that's fascinating. I do love interviewing people too and learning from their stories. But you've interviewed so many people. What are the key lessons that you've learned and key takeaways from all these people that you've learned? You know, I want to hear about success and what's made them successful and the mindset that's got them to where they have become. So whether that be a survivor or a celebrity, what are your key lessons from interviewing all these people?
Yeah. So I would say from a survivor is someone in my book, he was a finance guy. He had pancreatic stage 4 cancer. He was told he had a 2 to 4% chance of living. And he said, wait, I'm a numbers guy. Why can't I be part of the 98 to 96% who survive it? So he survived it. He's still with us. He's still doing what he needs to do. Cancer battle was extremely hard and painful, but he's still here. So that's a win in that direction. In terms of Venus Williams, I loved interviewing her because she was so candid about the fact that people see her as the epitome of sports, but yet she has her own gastrointestinal issues, and that was hampering her ability to perform the way she wanted to perform. And she started her own wellness line called Happy Viking because that was a reason for her to do that. And she saw it as not a hindrance, but as a vehicle to spread this idea of wellness further. Another individual that I really like to talk about all the time is this individual that really was about the fact that he wanted to show himself as something greater than what society deemed that he should be. And he made a pivot, and that pivot didn't really pay off initially. But at the end of the day, he realized, what is my legacy going to be if I don't choose this particular path of where I want to go? And so those really inspire me because it's always about taking the risk. People think like you can just follow this entrepreneurial path and everything is rosy. And it's not. It's ups and downs. People don't know what they're doing sometimes. Sometimes it's a lesson in failure because failure is just a reframe of success that is yet to come. And so those are really the stories that always allow me to really dig deep into what I'm doing and know that I'm making the impact that I want to in order for other people to feel the impact for themselves.
Wow. And, just a question that came to mind when you're interviewing all these survivors, not knowing what the future holds and knowing that they could die, it's just a scary thought. So you actually have to think about your priorities and what's more important in life. So what are some key takeaways from those people, the survivors, and what have you learned from them in terms of when they were going through those tough times, trying to recover, but not knowing what the future holds? Was that like they would have had some hope that they had held on to, regrets as well? Like, what are your thoughts when you interviewed them?
Well, Spark, the thread line or the through line that I found to be true is everyone talks about this idea of cancer doesn't have to be a death sentence. That's the first thing that most of them said, that I saw myself as someone who could survive this. I don't know how I was going to survive it, but I saw myself as someone who could do this. So that's the number one thing. The second one, which I didn't use, which was really a great source of inspiration for most of them, was about leaning on to their friends and family to not just ask them how they're doing, but to give them jobs in the process. So one of them was a scribe, came to the doctor's office, wrote down everything the doctor said. So that way they felt that the pressure of what the doctor was telling them wasn't so difficult to take on. Another person really said that For them, the healing was their husband coming home from work and doing the stuff that he would normally not do, because it was his way to show that he was there for her, even though he couldn't really talk to her about it, because no one knows until you've been through cancer what cancer journey is like. Probably the other thing as well is that most of the people that I talk to, they have this idea that people talk about resilience all the time. And I did a piece on rising through resilience. At this point, it probably interviewed about 120, 125 people on this idea of what is resilience. It's this idea of just bouncing back. And most of them found that the resilience story was tied into the grateful story. So in other words, in order to be resilient, you have to look forward to something that you're grateful for. And one of my teachers is a professor of the University of Pennsylvania, talked about when you create gratitude lists, because people do it all the time, ask yourself this question: why is it that you're grateful for what you wrote on the list? So I'll give you an example. I'm grateful for the fact that I have a house that's in a very prime location. Well, why are you grateful for it? Oh, I'm grateful for it because I actually worked really hard and I have it and I can live here, and it's something that I can sort of check off my box as something that I accomplished in my life. So it adds a level of savoriness, it adds a level of understanding, and it just allows you to appreciate it further.
Wow. Who has been your biggest inspiration and why?
Wow. I would say I'm inspired by a lot of people. As you know, as a journalist, I consume a lot of content and media and news. I can't say it's one person in particular. It probably would be that friend who I no longer speak to her for whatever reason. But she was probably one of the most inspirational people that I met, probably one of the wisest people. And even though she said what she said and I understood where it came from, it did make me think and dig deeper. So that's number one. I would probably say Oprah Winfrey, just because I grew up on her philosophy and how she lives her life. And I really think she's an epitome of that particular truth. But I would say thirdly, it's just all the other sages and inspiring religious figures throughout time, starting from Buddha to Jesus to Paramahansa Yogananda. I would say it's really learning from this idea of self-realization, this idea of loving thyself, and this idea of both work, service, and gratitude as well.
That's beautiful. What legacy do you hope to leave behind?
I feel I created the best out of a painful situation. And people who look at me and look at my journey from it often say to me, you just are not stopping. And I say to them, it's not about not stopping because I want to prove something to people. I don't have to prove anything to anyone, actually. I think for me, the legacy that I want to leave is that I came here a shy, introverted child from early on. I had a stuttering impediment when I was young. I had social anxiety when I was young. I faced other things like sexual identity issues when I was in college. And cancer came into my life. I've had ups and downs with business. I've lost money. I've made money. And I think for me, at the end of the day, I think my legacy would just be that I came, I saw, I tried to understand, I tried to give back service. I tried to unload and release painful memories and traumas and painful experiences in my life. But in return, I also understood the beauty of it all, because people often ask me, Linda, they're like, well, I want to know my purpose. I want to know my purpose. And I say to them always, think about it from a larger macro level. What's the purpose of all of us here on a giant rock suspended in space with other planets that we haven't really visited? What's the purpose of all? Maybe the purpose is collectively, there's a singular oversoul purpose for all of us being here. So instead of always looking at yourself individually, look at yourself as something greater than that. And then ask yourself a question: what are you attached to and what are you detached to in your life? Because that will give you an impetus to your purpose in general. So legacy would just be try to understand the human condition. I've been a long time seeker in this idea of why do people do the thing that they do? And even for myself, I ask myself the same question as well. But I think the more you get to know yourself, the more you allow yourself to not be controlled by the whims, but be controlled by things that are of importance in your life, things that you are maternally attached to because of upbringing, or even things that you are inspired by that will then catapult your life in different ways and means.
Wow. Can you share why is self-awareness so crucial for personal growth as well? Because it sounds like you're continuously on your journey, and self-awareness is definitely a part of that. But why is self-awareness crucial for everybody in the personal growth space? And
I think we live in a world now more than ever where there's so much out there. Like, you can find out what someone is doing in another country seconds when they're doing it. It's not even like minutes or hours or days, it's seconds. And I think we all get bamboozled by the trappings of the human experience, by the shiny objects, by the content, by the TikToks and by the IG reels. And I think what's missing is this idea of objectivity. And the objectivity is being objective with yourself, because people are so subjective. There's cancel culture here, and there's all these things happening that people are just taking such great offenses to. And I know COVID highlighted a lot of mental imbalances in our world, which is terrible, but I think it did shine a light on what we need to fix. I think self-awareness is really the only answer to how to fix all that, because if you can control yourself and control your motivations and control your predispositions and allow yourself to be a source of a guiding light for your own self rather than looking for external sources for that, it allows you to not only become more powerful, but you create more, you do more, you are more aligned. When you study Eastern philosophy, they call this idea of dharma. So it's karma is the lessons that you have to learn or overcome, and dharma is living that truthful purpose of what is it that you want to express. And so I think individually we're all called to do that, and self-awareness is really a great point. Now, I have to say there is a negative to self-awareness, which is being completely narcissistic, and that's the other side. But we all have our polar opposites of anything in life. So there's the truth and there's error. And I often tell people that you can still believe in a greater truth even though you find error. Never reject it, but allow yourself to really lean into what speaks to you. Where's the proof and evidence in that truth itself? So self-awareness is the cornerstone throughout all.
beautiful. And can you share any tips for how we can be present? You mentioned all the distractions, the TikToks, and like there's so many distractions, and it's taking away from being self-aware. And I've noticed that with my kids as well, because we're always on the phone and distracted. How do we become more present and live in the now? Any tips on that?
I think it's simple, and I don't like to confuse a lot of people because they often think that if they're starting something that they'll do it for a couple of days or a couple of weeks and then they just don't do it. So I'll just say there's many tools. So you can do breathing, any form of breathing, whether it's a body scan, like I said, breathing into different body parts, or doing box breathing, or doing 4 inhales in, 4 inhales out. Or just something more complex like pranayama breathing, or opposite nostril breathing, whatever is your liking. Yogic breath. There's different things. You can also do something as simple as nature walk, communing with nature. I have to admit, I'm not great at this. I'm getting better at it, but I'm trying because I'm a sort of city focused type of individual. So that option is there. You can journal. That's another option. You could do prayer if that's your thing. You could meditate. You can listen to instrumental music. You can hum. You can chant. You can just have quiet time. You can just, because people often confuse this idea of meditation. They think it has to be so complex, like lotus position and all that. And those things for people who've done it for a while are probably important, with the mudras and the posture. But I tell people all the time, meditation could just be quiet time with yourself. It could just be a couple of minutes zoning out. It doesn't have to be something if you want to go there, wonderful, but it doesn't have to be something as so grandiose. It could just be as simple as connecting with how you're feeling, what you're thinking, what you're sensing. What is it that you want to accomplish? What is it that you want to let go of today? Was it that made you angry or made you sad or frustrated you? Allow yourself to purge that, to release that, or to even examine that. Because like I mentioned previously, there's this greater self, right? There was that physical Savio that was dying, and there was this divine Savio. And so the constant struggle, the duality of our experience here I think on the planet for all of us, is trying to find that duality and make meaning of that duality.
Beautiful. Guys, if you found this interesting and valuable, please do me a favor and hit the like and subscribe button. Or if you're listening through the podcast, please hit the follow. It does help the channel. Finally, where can people find you?
Thank you for asking that. So they can find me on my website. So it's Savio, Savio, P is my middle initial, Clemente, Clement. On there, you can find my TEDx talk. Taking at this point probably 2 more individuals from my 90-day coaching program. So it's about adversity and how to tell your story, amplify your impact, and create opportunities in your life. I also have a newsletter that I send out, a weekly one. I recently covered the red carpet at the Oscars, and I wrote candidly about, do I belong in a sea of Hollywood's elites? Even though I was there, I was vetted to go. It dawned on me that, do I actually belong? So this idea of belonging really came and was very vocal in that aspect for me. So they can find me there, and on social media, on every platform, I'm at The Human Resolve.
Beautiful. Your story has been incredibly inspiring, and I'm looking forward to following your journey and then seeing how far you get and helping others heal as well. We need more people like you. So thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Linda. And I would like to leave people with this idea, like I mentioned, and it's just really this idea of just to know thyself is to heal thyself. The more that you're in touch with who you are and what's stirring you, the more you can help not only yourself, but other people around you.
Yes, beautiful. I love that message. Thank you so much for that, Savio. Have a great one.
Thanks, Linda.